Hey, welcome to Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel, and it's a beautiful day. Beautiful day in Texas. Finally looks like it might start cooling off. Summer, whatever you want to call it. We're starting to hit into fall, which will be nice. We're getting into the 70s. 70s next week. We're looking forward to that. A break from the heat, but that's not why I'm here. Tell you about the weather. Want to talk about surviving the first 30 days after SHTF. Right, the poop hits the fan. Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it. Some common prepper terms, you may or may not know them. But what does that mean, right? What does that mean, the end of the world? I want to dig into that. I got a lot of friends, family, still aren't preppers. I sort of get it, right? It's getting a little bit harder to support the people that say I don't need to be prepared, but they're out there, right? I know them, you know them. So let's talk about why you would want to be prepared for the first 30 days, and we'll get into a lot of detail. I got a lot I want to cover. Haven't made a video since last week. We're doing about one a week right now just because we're busy, so I've had a lot to think about, a lot of time to think about this, a lot I want to cover. So what are possible? We'll start with possible causes before we start talking about prepping for the end of the world, the doomsday. All right, number one. So read a lot of, if you follow the channel, read a lot of dystopian. I'm into the dystopian fiction. But I also like to dig into a lot of scholarly articles, a lot of government documents. We covered the FEMA nuclear response plan. Look at the news, look at recent history, right? So I'm going to give you a combination, my own opinion. This is all my own opinion, my combination of those things, and kind of talk through some different scenarios, some fantasy, some reality, right? And even some of the fantasy, they try to base it on what they think would happen if something happened. So James Wesley Rawls, he's a long time figure in the prepping community. Wrote the book series Patriots, Finished Survivors. Great book series. That follows the SHTF, the collapse moment. Starts with financial collapse and really leads to a societal collapse, right? And he goes through different stories of what happens in the United States, things like the power grid going down, society collapsing, and we'll get into different areas. I've got different areas I want to cover, like supplies and barter and all those different things, hunter-gatherers, bugging in, bugging out, but he's a financial collapse guy. You read his book series, big on financial collapse and big on trade. You know, throughout his stories, a lot of play on silver, gold, different trade items. But if you jump to William Fortune, the 1 second after series, right, where he goes into long book series, great book series. It's based on EMP. EMP hits, everything goes dark. Right, it's very depressing. You look at some of the studies, they say 90% civilization or the population would not survive the first year in a major grid down. But that's his thing, grid down. How do we survive? What happens to people as they go through that? And so we'll touch on that a little bit. Judith Erickson, October Falls series, another EMP, right? The idea EMP hits, everything's shut down, and then how do people move forward? How do people survive? Can't miss Cormac McCarthy, The Road. It's a nuclear winter, right? Pretty dark. I don't know if they actually say nuclear winter in the story, but it's definitely a nuclear winter type situation where nothing grows, everything's dead, and these people are trying to survive in this post-apocalyptic SHTF. Leave the World Behind. Everyone loved that movie. But that was cyber, really, like cyber attack, cyber war, followed up by different terrorist attacks and foreign nations moving against the U.S. And though they didn't go necessarily long term, you got a sense for what could happen in the event of some kind of major country collapsing, cyber attack on the U.S., the Tesla cars driving themselves into walls and whatnot. Red Dawn, of course, we all know Red Dawn, foreign invasion. Foreign invasion's always possible, right? Any of these are possible. You can't tell me an EMP attack is impossible. We have enemies. Enemies have these weapons. Nuclear winter, scientifically debatable, but certainly nuclear war is possible. These are all possible. I'm not going to give percentage chance of likely. Red Dawn, foreign invasion, The Stand, pandemic, right? And we've had a pandemic there are pathogens that exist that could be incredibly destructive to the population, you know, anywhere between 30 and 90% kill rate. And if you're in that situation, if we were to have the stand, Captain Trips, Ebola, smallpox, some weaponized variation of Marburg or anything else tear through society and 50% of the population died, people are dropping in the streets, you'll know you're in a real pandemic at that point, right? It's not I will comply, I won't comply, it's people are dropping dead in the streets. Could happen, right? These pathogens exist. What about natural disasters, right? And I'll split into localized and then global, right? We talked about the FEMA and nuclear response plan. FEMA's not high on a lot of people's lists right now, and that's okay. I get it. I'm not a big FEMA supporter. You know, you have things like Katrina. Katrina happened. There was martial law, right? There was a lot that came out of that. You can read the Pipe Hitters series of surviving collapse, and I think a lot of his experiences came from things like Katrina. There's bigger potential natural disasters. Yellowstone supervolcano, that's been a hot button for preppers for decades before all this modern stuff happened. And you know, we're every day we're on the edge of some kind of major collapse. Back in the day, you used to speculate as a prepper about things like Yellowstone supervolcano. Well, something like that would be massive wide-scale destruction, and you wouldn't have organizations like FEMA or anyone else coming to the rescue because the destruction would be too vast, right? Too big of a target area. The old pole flips was a big thing back in the day. It's sort of happening. There was always speculation on what would happen if the poles reversed and the poles flipped and all that. Of course, climate change apocalypse. There's got to be enough climate change people out there that can envision climate change apocalypse as a possibility. Civil unrest, war, right? It's an election year. You know, if you follow B.J. Campbell, the surprisingly solid mathematical case of the tinfoil hat gun prepper, great article. I think he paywalled it, and I can understand it's a good article. But he breaks down that in any person's lifespan, there's something like a 30% chance of civil unrest, of civil war. And I think a lot of people are saying right now that it's higher than that, right? You look at the next 3 to 6 months. Is it 50-50? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. I don't need to speculate. It's going to happen or it's not going to happen. I'm not going to cause it or not cause it either way. But people would say it's higher than that 30% in your lifetime of happening maybe the next 3 to 6 months. So all of these things are possible. Everything I've listed out, whether it's something that's happened before, whether it's a natural disaster that could happen, major earthquakes, West Coast breaking off into the sea, probably not going to happen. All these things could happen, EMPs, nuclear wars, right? So whether you choose to prepare or not, it's hard to argue that these things aren't possible, that some kind of a disaster couldn't happen. So I want to touch on that, right? I want to get into that. It's not the entire purpose of the video. I know I was rambling a little bit there. So how do you survive the first 30 days? And I've had some people ask me that, surviving the first 30 days, right? Let's say first you bug in, right? You can stay home, whether it's a localized natural disaster, whether it's EMP and your cars may or may not work anyway. That's up to you. I'm not going to argue it. I might do another EMP video just to dig into the swamp that is EMP impact theory. First, I would say gas mask, right? We've talked about gas masks before. Look at the chemical fires, chemical plant fires, spills, all that stuff that's happening. Gas mask, probably not a bad idea. Something to keep in mind, those cartridges, I think they're 40 plus bucks each, depending on what you get. They only last like 4 hours, so the idea you buy a gas mask and you're gonna wear it for 3 or 4 days, not a thing. Having a gas mask in a disaster, probably not a bad idea. We've talked about things like medical supplies, absolutely, especially in the first few minutes of any disaster. You want to stop the bleed, right? We took some stop the bleed classes. Actually went through one of those recently. All my friends were trying to do some first aid, learn a little bit more about first aid. In my group, I've got EMTs, we've got nurses, we got a lot of sorts of medical in my group, but medical first aid, right? You need that even in small emergencies without having to be Shtf disasters. Medical's good. Food, obviously you need food to survive. That's sort of a given. You know, there was the recommendation, the government recommendation of 3 days worth of food and water. we're seeing that play out, that maybe that's enough. Not enough, sorry, maybe not enough. Hey, maybe it's enough. Sometimes it would be, but maybe it's not enough. Maybe you need to think longer than 3 days. You see what's happening in North Carolina, you see what's happening in Florida. The system, even when it's working as it should, as good as possible, as much as we'd want it to be, even then, 3 days may not be enough, right? So we're talking 30 days. 30 days worth of food. Figure out your normal calorie intake, something kind of cool. Fitbit, I got the Fitbit now. I'm working out as much as I can, probably working out more than I'm making YouTube videos. It actually tells you how many calories you burn in a day. So if you're curious on how many calories you eat in a day, now this is imperfect, and I totally get it's imperfect, but if you want to know how many calories you eat in a day, something like this tells you how many calories you burn in a day. If you're not losing weight and you're burning, say, 3,000 calories a day, then you're eating 3,000 calories a day. And I know that's absolutely imperfect and completely flawed, but it's a baseline. It's something to think about. You can go off 2,000 calorie daily, whatever you want to do. We've shown putting food in Mylar bags and buckets, MREs, sauce rations, power bars, whatever it is. Think about 30 days worth of food. 30 times 20 if I'm doing the math. I'm sorry, 30 times 2,000 if I'm doing the math right. That's 60,000 calories you want to stash away. That might be a couple bags of wheat, right? We've done through that. Not going too deep into that, but think 30 days. What's 30 days worth of food look like for your family? And it doesn't have to be good, expensive stuff. If you can't afford that, we've talked about hardtack, right? You can do 30 pounds of hardtack. It's almost 30 days worth of food, and that's going to cost you like 15 bucks, right? You got to store it, you got to take the time to make it, but think 30 days worth of food, right? So next one's water. So I picked this up. It's 7-gallon water jug at Walmart for, I think it was about 20 bucks. So this is a week's worth of water, right? At the minimum, they say a gallon per person per day. Obviously, you're not taking huge showers. This is more or less considered the minimum, 7 gallons. So if you wanted to do a month, you get 4 of these, 20 bucks each, that's $80, right? Water bottles are still cheaper. Just getting the basic water bottles. I looked it up before I made this. You can get a 24 pack of water bottles, 24 pack of 16-ounce water bottles for $4, and that's 3.1 gallons. So $4 for 3 gallons, $20 for an empty 7-gallon container. Basic water bottles are still your cheapest go-to. We're going to get into water more later when we're talking about bug in, bug out. But here's the reality with water. If you're bugging out, if it's EMP, if your car doesn't work, this full weighs 58 gallons. Obviously, it's not full right now. 58 gallons. So if you've got to walk away from your house, if you got to go off into the woods, how many of these are you carrying on your back? Well, probably none at 58 gallons apiece, unless you're just in great shape, right? Water's an issue. You need water, right? They say 3 days without water. I think someone's plowing his field back there. 3 days without water, you're not gonna make it. You're gonna have problems. So you need water. Water's heavy, right? Shelter, obviously need shelter at all times. Your house, but as soon as you start talking about disaster, maybe you don't have the house anymore. You talk about bugging out. You can't take the house with you. Maybe you have an RV. Maybe there's fuel shortages, right? You should have emergency shelter options. Things like tents and sleeping bags, stuff you can carry, stuff you can take with you. You can rely on shelter, medical. 30 days, hygiene. If you watch Naked and Afraid, with people that don't brush their teeth for a long period of time, they can start losing their teeth. So basic hygiene, brushing your teeth, those kind of things. You want to have at least 30 days, right? I'm not going to tell you how many tubes of toothpaste you need for 30 days. Think about the last time you bought toothpaste, or buy a tube of toothpaste, use that one, right, and just see how long it lasts you. It might be a month, it might be more than a month. But think about the basic things you need to get through a month. You know, if you want to do the EMP power outage grid down plan, people talk about this. Cut the power to your house for the weekend. See what you have, see what you don't have, right? We have last summer or last winter, 2 winters ago, I'm losing track, right? We had a week grid down because of the winter storm, right? You start seeing what you have and what you don't have, what works, Coleman lanterns, flashlights, cooktops, whatever you have, whatever you don't have. The moment the lights go out, the clock starts ticking for a lot of people, and we'll talk more about things like grid down, and they say 90% of the population won't survive a grid down. The moment the power's out, the clock's ticking on everything for everybody, because with the grid down, You lose the ability to fill up at the gas station, you lose the hospital, you lose the grocery store, means you're not getting medicine delivered. Farms aren't necessarily bringing food to the market, right? There's a lot of what ifs and possibilities if the grid's down. So what about self-defense tools, right? We go back to any of the scenarios we talked about, right? And we'll get into some of the things more, but whether it's EMP, whether it's financial collapse, whether it's civil unrest, maybe with a pandemic, if the pandemic has a collapse, there's going to be hungry people that want your stuff. There's going to be people that want to take what you have, and maybe you're of the mindset, I'll just give it to them. And that's okay, right? You do you. You've got to live with your decisions. But looters, rioters, gangs, hungry neighbors, roaming hordes, all those kind of things, self-defense, not bad. Been doing IDPA matches, which is International Defensive Pistol Association. It's good skill building, good practice, right? If you're going to get self-defense tools, anything like that, have the extra ammo, practice, take classes, get advice, do your research, maybe get the insurance, right? Get something like that. Think about how you'll defend yourself in civil unrest, in situations where your neighbors don't have food and they want your food and they're knocking on your door saying, you guys have any food in there, right? Self-defense, even in the first 30 days, depending on the collapse, depending on what's going on in SHTF, you're going to need to be ready to defend your supplies, or I guess you just give them away to anyone, and then you're going to need more, right? There's the restock. How are you going to restock after 30 days? If things go 30 days, do they go longer? And you should have a restock plan. We'll get into that a little bit. Trade. So if you're a James Wesley Rawls guy, there was a lot of trade in his stories, right? In the stories, silver coins, gold coins, markets setting up, people selling seeds, a lot of trade. Depends on the situations. If you go William Fortune, if you go Judith Erickson, if you go Cormac McCarthy Road, October Falls, 1 minute after, not a lot of trade. Not a lot of trade in those stories. If survival hits to that point where people can't get their basic necessities, they're not going to take a silver coin and go to the market and get some seeds so they can grow food. So whether or not silver and gold are going to matter, whether or not trade is going to matter, depends on the situation. Does the core of society hold together? You know, said in the Survivor's book, there was a small kind of oil refinery, oil rig station that created power, and people would go to work and they paid them in silver coins. So in SHTF, in your situation, in your scenario, if you're still planning on going to work and getting your silver coins, sure, gold, silver has value, right? I'm not going to go too much into this one. Gold and silver has value. Other things you can trade, other things you need, obviously food. If you have extra food, if you're growing crops, maybe you trade that. Maybe you keep that so you don't starve over the winter. Things like extra water filters, extra water, soap, toilet paper, ammo. And there's a school of thought around ammo as a trade. Defense tools as trading. You wouldn't give someone you don't know, trade them the means that they can come back and rob you. So there's logic behind that. But if all you have is ammo and you don't have food and there's no way to hunt, maybe you trade that ammo for dinner, right? You don't know the situation. Canning supplies, winter clothing, fuel, propane, lighters. I think it was Bosnia or Serbia. There was an actual SHTF situation where a town was under siege and they had to survive as a town cut off from the world for, I think it was a year. And coming out of that, person telling the story said lighters. If I could have had 10,000 lighters, I would have been a rich man, because people need that fire. They need to be able to create fire. Lighters, there was a guy that knew how to refill lighters in the story, and that was a true story. That wasn't a fictional. Vices, I've been homebrewing for a long time, but homebrew and grow your own tobacco, things you could trade, right? Depending on what happens, if there is SHTF, if the core of society holds together, but you're surrounded by gangs of looters or foreign invaders, sure, trade is possible. You may need something you don't have. You may have something you don't need. You work out a trade. Do it safely. Don't show off all your stuff. Don't roll in, hey, I have 600 pounds of food at home, but, what do you got to trade, right? People are going to want to come steal your stuff if things break down, if society breaks down. So variables, a lot of variables on these SHTF situations. Infrastructure, will the grid hold? are we going to have running water, right? If there's a pandemic, if there's a natural disaster, war, civil unrest, EMP, any of that kind of stuff, nuclear attack, asteroid strike, Night of the Living Dead, right? Will the infrastructure hold? Will the grid stay up? Maybe, maybe not, right? Terrorist attack. You should plan either way. If you're a prepper, if you see all these things that could happen, you want to plan either way. Obviously, life would be easier if the grid's on, right? Even if you look at survivors, patriots, any of those, they start rebuilding the grid, so it could be localized grids are up, not national. Things like, running water. You need water. You need to replenish your water. Once again, this is, I said, 58 pounds for 7 gallons of water. That's a week, so a month is almost over 200 pounds of water for a month. Not carrying that around with you, you need to replenish. Now, you can get it now, you can stock up now, but your stocks will run out. So if you don't have running water, you need to do a well pretty quick, water catchment, find a lake, stream, river, any of that stuff, right? And we'll get on that bug in, bug out, hunter-gatherers. If there's no water where you're at, you're not staying there, right? It doesn't matter how nice your house is, how much food you have stashed away. If you don't have water, you're going to need to go to somewhere that has water, or you won't survive very long. Communications could be a big player, whether it's ham radio, whether it's shortwave radio, whether you're reaching out to people. Should you reach out to people? Having those communication skills, equipment ahead of time, backup power so it can run on batteries, all good things to have, especially if you have a group. You've got a group that you want to survive together, having that ability to communicate, coordinate, do tactical things, reach out for help, right? Any of that. See what's going on in the world. Communication's important. That is a variable. Same thing, government. Government, martial law. Is it civil unrest? Is there martial law like in Katrina? Certainly could change your plans if the government's there or not. When you start looking at some of the fictional stuff I mentioned, 1 Second After, October Falls, The Road, there was no government, right? Government collapsed pretty quick. Even patriots and survivors with financial collapse, societal collapse, eventually governments started to reform, and they weren't the good guys. I'll just say that, not giving it away. Foreign invaders, right? We got Red Dawn. Is it possible? Sure. Right? You could say no. You could say it's never happened, and that's fine. But it's more than zero. It's a more than 0% chance. And then you go Red Dawn. How do you deal with that if there's enemy invaders in your country? They had some of that in October Falls, taking on foreign invaders, doing the tactical stuff, having those war games, right? Theoretically possible. Obviously, you want some good equipment to deal with that. Supply chain collapse. We sort of almost had one, and you saw the panic, which sort of almost collapsed parts of it anyway, with the longshoremen strike and the toilet paper panic. It can happen. We've mentioned that many times. You can probably see that in the world. Supply chains are very complicated, very intertwined, and it doesn't take much to have small collapses, shortages, regional collapses. That's a variable in any situation, right? That's the resupply. What do you have right now in your house? What can you carry, right? If you lost your house, natural disaster, fire, right? And then how do you resupply, right? Is it gold? Is it silver? Is it looting? Is it hunting? Is it gathering, right? So we talk about bug in, bug out farming, homesteading versus hunter-gathering. I try to do the homestead thing. We could produce a lot of our own food here, as long as I can keep the chickens alive. I've done videos on that. I'd survive on eggs and fried chicken forever, just by breeding, right? You breed the chickens, keep them alive, maybe eat the bugs. What happens? Natural disaster, house is gone. What happens? As I said, you have no water here. You got to leave that all behind. You've got to bug out. You've got to move on. There were hunter-gatherers throughout history for a reason, because an area could only support a population of people for so long. They had to move on, right? If you look at the Great Depression on hunting, if hunting's your plan, they nearly hunted deer to extinction. But if there's a population collapse due to Shtf, maybe hunting, fishing can sustain you. Hunter-gathering, moving, right? Moving to where the supplies are, to things are. So bug out bag, right? What's in a bug out bag? We've done the get home bag. I haven't gone too deep into bug out bags. If you're curious, there's a lot of them out there. Watch a couple seasons of Alone, right? They claim it's realistic. It feels realistic, but they get 10 items. And you can actually go on the website, and I've done it, and read the 10 items. What did they take with them? What are their 10 items? So if you're building a bug out bag, which means you're just going out into the world, you might be trying to go somewhere. Hey, we're going to the cabin, we're going to the aunt's house, hey, grandpa's got a farm. If you're going somewhere, you can plan that distance and how you're going to carry your supplies and resupply along the way. Once again, 58 pounds for a week's worth of water, you're not carrying a lot of those around on your back, right? How do you resupply? How do you filter water? But check out Alone, they got 10 items. So you're going to be limited on what you can carry, and that depends on your physical fitness. So practice now. So I've been doing a lot of rucking. I'm up to about 60 pounds when I'm rucking, just for fun, right? But how much can you carry for a long period of time? Now, bug out bag, bug in, Alone. So one thing about bugging in, staying in, there's a defensive advantage. So if there's unrest, if there's riots, if there's looters, if there's zombie hordes, if people are pouring out of the cities into the countryside, mass migration, you do have a defensive advantage. So your place is getting attacked, they need 3 to 1, right? Generally that's considered three times more attackers than defenders. So if you've got 10 people in your house, you could hold off against theoretically about 30 people, and that's all obviously theoretical based on training, equipment, and all that stuff. But there's always a defensive advantage to bugging in, staying in. If there's no water, you're done, right? You move on. If there's no food, you're gonna have to move on. You go hunter-gatherer. Maybe you can grow food, maybe you can harvest water, maybe you dig a well, maybe you don't ever have to. Hopefully you never have to bug out, but hunter-gatherers were a thing. So locational, seasonal, right? So if there was a grid down, long-term SHTF, but the majority of the population survived, or even half the population, you're gonna get mass migration out of the cities. You're going to get mass migration probably moving south for the weather, right? You move north, you're going into winter, you're going into snow. Most people aren't trained, equipped, ready for that. So you're going to have mass migrations moving south. And if you've got 100,000, 1 million people moving south, they're going to be like locusts, right? They're going to need food, they're going to need water. They're going to clear everything in their path. And how would you deal with that, right? So last thing I wanted to hit on, in a group or alone, any major survival situation. I get the lone wolves, and you can lone wolf it. And in terms of a location's ability to sustain you, whether you're hunting, fishing, any of that, obviously more people need more food. So in that situation, being alone, your stack of rice and beans would last longer. As a group, you're going to have more of the skills, right? Whether you're bartering skills, whether first aid, hunting, farming, chopping firewood. So the bigger the group, the better, in my opinion, right? This is all my opinion. This is speculation. I said that in the beginning, but we'll say that again. So want to get into the idea, right? That prepper mindset. Why should you prepare? Well, there's a long list of possible what ifs. There's that baseline 30% chance in your lifetime of civil unrest. You look at what's going on now. Maybe you still don't want to prepare, and that's okay. But surviving 30 days, scale it up to a year. It's about having the resources you need to sustain your life and the ability to replenish those. So hope that helps out, right? Just making the videos, trying to make the time to keep this thing going. Do appreciate the comments from everybody. Trying to get back to them. I'm doing a horrible job of responding to comments. I'm trying to get back to them, but check in, drop your location, let us know where you're at. I don't want your street address, but hey, you're from Texas, you're from here. Check in. You know, I like to see where everybody's at. We can try to build that sense of community. Respond to other people's comments. If I'm doing bad, help me out. If you see a comment, start a conversation, right? Let's keep the conversation going. Let's get the preppers together. Let's help people that are interested in prepping, because there's a lot of new ones, a lot of people interested in prepping right now. So as always, thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.